Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city wake up beneath him. At 38 years old, he had already achieved what most people could only dream of. His technology company, Wellington Systems, was worth $12 billion and employed over 50,000 people across 6 countries. The servers humming in the basement of this very building processed millions of transactions every day, keeping his empire running smoothly. He had built this company from nothing. 15 years ago, he was a college dropout with a borrowed laptop and an idea that everyone said would never work. Today, governments and corporations around the world depended on his systems. His software powered everything from hospital networks to stock exchanges. Marcus took pride in the fact that he had created something that the world couldn't function without. The morning routine was always the same. Marcus arrived at 7, grabbed his coffee from the executive kitchen, and spent the first hour reviewing overnight reports from his teams in London, Tokyo, and Mumbai. His personal assistant, Sarah, would brief him on the day's schedule while he checked the system performance dashboards on his 3 large monitors. Everything ran like clockwork, just the way he liked it. But this Tuesday morning felt different from the moment he stepped out of the elevator. The usual buzz of activity in the lobby seemed quieter. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his screens with a confused expression. Marcus dismissed it as nothing and continued to his office, but something in the air made him uneasy. Sarah was already at her desk outside his office, but instead of her usual cheerful greeting, she looked stressed. Her fingers were flying across her keyboard, and she barely looked up when he passed. Marcus pushed through the heavy glass doors into his office and immediately noticed that his monitors were dark. Not sleeping, not in power save mode, completely black. He pressed the power button on his main computer. Nothing. He tried the second monitor. Still nothing. A cold feeling began to grow in his stomach as he reached for his phone to call the IT department. But when he looked at the screen, he saw something that made his blood run cold: no service. Marcus walked quickly to Sarah's desk. She was on her landline, and he could hear the frustration in her voice as she spoke to someone. When she hung up, she looked at him with worry in her eyes. "Mr. Wellington, we have a problem," she said quietly. "All our systems are down. Not just here in the building, but everywhere. London, Tokyo, Mumbai, everything is offline. The IT team is saying they've never seen anything like this before." The elevator ride down to the IT department felt like it took forever. Marcus's mind was racing. System outages happened sometimes, but they were usually fixed within minutes. His company had backup systems, redundant servers, and the best cybersecurity team money could buy. A complete global shutdown was supposed to be impossible. The IT department was chaos when he arrived. Usually, this floor was quiet except for the gentle hum of computers and the occasional conversation. Now it looked like a war room. Engineers were running between workstations, phones were ringing constantly, and everyone was talking at once. The big screen that normally showed system status in calm green lights was completely red. David Chin, his chief technology officer, spotted Marcus and hurried over. David had been with the company for 8 years and was one of the most brilliant minds Marcus had ever worked with. If anyone could fix this, it would be David. But the look on his face told a different story. "Marcus, I need to be straight with you," David said, running his hands through his already messy hair. "This isn't just a normal outage. Someone got into our core systems and deployed some kind of virus or malware that we've never seen before. It's not just shutting things down, it's rewriting the fundamental code that runs everything. Every time we try to restart a server, it crashes again within minutes." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "How is that possible? We have the best security in the industry. We spend $20 million a year on cybersecurity." "I don't know yet," David replied. "But whoever did this knew exactly how our systems work. They knew our security protocols, our backup procedures, everything. This feels like an inside job, but I've checked all our employees and contractors. Everyone with high-level access has been accounted for and cleared. The next few hours were a blur of emergency meetings, phone calls with government officials, and desperate attempts to find a solution. Marcus learned that the attack had affected not just Wellington Systems, but several of their major clients as well. 3 hospitals in New York had lost access to their patient records. The Chicago Stock Exchange had suspended trading because their systems were unreliable. A power grid in Texas was running on backup generators because the computer systems that managed energy distribution were compromised. By lunchtime, Marcus's phone was ringing constantly with calls from angry clients, government officials, and reporters. The stock price of Wellington Systems had dropped 30% in just 4 hours. Lawyers were already talking about lawsuits that could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But worse than the money was the reputation damage. Marcus had built his entire business on the promise that his systems were secure and reliable. Now the whole world was watching his company fail. The afternoon brought no relief. David and his team had been working nonstop, but every solution they tried made the problem worse. The virus seemed to learn from their attempts to stop it, adapting and spreading to new systems faster than they could contain it. It was like fighting an enemy that could read their minds. Marcus found himself pacing the hallways, feeling helpless in a way he hadn't experienced since he was a struggling college student. He was used to being in control, used to having solutions. His entire identity was built around being the person who could fix anything, who could turn any challenge into an opportunity. But now he was watching 15 years of work crumble around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As evening approached, the building began to empty out. Many employees had been sent home because their computers weren't working anyway. The executive floors, usually buzzing with activity until late at night, were eerily quiet. Marcus stood in his dark office, looking out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there was the person or group responsible for destroying his life's work. But he had no idea who they were or how to stop them. David appeared in his doorway, looking exhausted. "Marcus, I hate to tell you this, but we need to consider the possibility that we can't fix this on our own. The virus is too sophisticated, too adaptive. We might need to bring in outside help." "What kind of outside help?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Government cybersecurity experts, maybe even some of the hackers who work with the FBI to catch other hackers. People who think like criminals because they understand how these attacks work." The idea of admitting defeat, of asking for help from outsiders, made Marcus sick to his stomach. He had built his reputation on being the best in the business. Calling in outside experts would be admitting to the world that he couldn't handle his own company's problems. But as he looked at the red warning lights on David's laptop screen, Marcus realized he might not have a choice. The virus had already cost him billions of dollars and damaged relationships with clients that had taken years to build. His pride might be the only thing he had left to lose, and if losing it meant saving his company, maybe it was a price he would have to pay. As the clock struck midnight, marking the end of the worst day in Wellington Systems history, Marcus made the call to the FBI's cybersecurity division. He had no way of knowing that the solution to his problem was already in the building, pushing a cleaning cart through the empty hallways just 3 floors below where he stood. 3 floors below the chaos in the executive offices, Jerome Washington pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway with the same steady rhythm he had maintained for the past 6 years. At 52 years old, Jerome had perfected the art of being invisible. He arrived at Wellington Systems every weekday at 11 p.m. and left at 7 a.m., cleaning offices, emptying trash cans, and maintaining the building while most employees slept safely at home. Most people who worked in the building had never spoken to Jerome beyond a polite nod or a brief "good evening" when they stayed late. To them, he was simply part of the furniture, as unremarkable and necessary as the elevators or the air conditioning. They saw the uniform, the cleaning cart, and the quiet man who made sure their workplace was spotless every morning, but they never saw Jerome himself. What they didn't know was that Jerome Washington held 2 master's degrees, one in computer science from MIT and another in electrical engineering from Stanford. They didn't know that he had once worked for the National Security Agency, designing cybersecurity systems that protected government secrets. They didn't know that he had published research papers on advanced encryption methods that were still used by security experts around the world. But they also didn't know about the security clearance he had lost 12 years ago, or the accusations that had destroyed his career in a single day. They didn't know about the sleepless nights spent fighting a legal battle against charges that were eventually dropped, but not before his reputation was ruined. They didn't know about the depression that followed, or the years when he couldn't find any company willing to hire him for the kind of work he had dedicated his life to mastering. Jerome had taken the janitor position at Wellington Systems 6 years ago out of necessity. His savings were gone, his house was in foreclosure, and his daughter needed money for college. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he could rebuild his career and find his way back into the technology industry. But temporary had become permanent, and Jerome had learned to find peace in the simple routine of cleaning and maintenance. The irony wasn't lost on him. During the day, Wellington Systems employed hundreds of cybersecurity experts who earned six-figure salaries to protect the company's computers. At night, one of the most qualified security experts in the country cleaned their offices for $12 an hour. But Jerome had made peace with that irony. He had learned that dignity didn't come from job titles or salary figures, but from doing honest work and taking care of the people who depended on him. Tonight felt different, though. As Jerome cleaned the lower floors, he noticed that many more employees than usual were still in the building. Lights were on in offices that were normally dark by midnight. He could hear raised voices and the constant sound of phones ringing, even though it was past 2 in the morning. Something was clearly wrong. Jerome's curiosity was piqued when he reached the 39th floor and saw that the entire IT department was still buzzing with activity. Through the glass walls, he could see engineers hunched over their computers, looking frustrated and exhausted. Normally, Jerome would simply clean around them and mind his own business, but tonight he found himself paying attention to the conversations happening around him. "The encryption is unlike anything we've ever seen," he heard one engineer say to another. "It's not just locking us out, it's actively rewriting our security protocols as we try to break through them." Jerome paused in his cleaning, his trained ear picking up technical details that would have been meaningless to most people but told him exactly what kind of attack was happening. Advanced persistent threat, polymorphic malware, probably with machine learning capabilities that allowed it to adapt to countermeasures in real time. It was sophisticated work, the kind of thing that required deep knowledge of both computer systems and human psychology. As he emptied trash cans and wiped down desks, Jerome listened to more fragments of conversation. The attackers had somehow gained access to Wellington Systems' most secure servers. They had bypassed multiple layers of security that should have been impossible to penetrate. But more concerning to Jerome was that they seemed to have insider knowledge of the company's specific security procedures and protocols. "Sir, we've been working on this for 15 hours straight," Jerome heard a young engineer say to David Chen, the CTO. "Maybe we should bring in some outside consultants who specialize in this kind of attack." David shook his head. "Mr. Wellington doesn't want word getting out that we can't handle this ourselves. The stock price has already tanked. If investors think we're completely helpless, the company could be finished." Jerome understood the dilemma. In the cybersecurity world, reputation was everything. Companies that couldn't protect their own systems lost the trust of clients and investors very quickly. But Jerome also knew that pride and stubbornness could turn a manageable crisis into a complete disaster. As he continued his rounds, cleaning the bathrooms and break rooms on the IT floor, Jerome found himself thinking about the technical challenges he was overhearing. The attack sounded like something he had encountered during his days at the NSA, when foreign governments and criminal organizations were constantly trying to penetrate American computer systems. He had developed techniques for fighting these kinds of adaptive threats, methods that were probably still classified and unknown to most private sector security experts. But Jerome was just the janitor. Nobody would want to hear his thoughts on cybersecurity, even if he had the expertise to help. He had learned long ago that people saw what they expected to see, and when they looked at him, they saw a middle-aged black man in a janitor's uniform. They didn't see the degrees on his wall at home, the research papers he had published, or the government commendation letters that recognized his contributions to national security. Jerome was cleaning the executive floors when he overheard a conference call between Marcus Wellington and what sounded like FBI cybersecurity specialists. Through the open door of the main conference room, he could hear the conversation on speakerphone. "Mr. Wellington, I need to be honest with you," the voice on the phone was saying. "This attack is beyond what most private companies can handle on their own. The sophistication level suggests state-sponsored hackers or a very advanced criminal organization. We can send a team, but it will take at least 18 hours to get our specialists on site, and by then, the damage could be irreversible." Jerome paused in the hallway, mop in hand, as he processed what he was hearing. 18 hours would indeed be too late. Based on the technical details he had overheard throughout the night, Jerome could tell that the virus was designed to cause maximum damage over a 72-hour period. The attackers were probably counting on the company being unable to respond quickly enough to stop the complete destruction of their systems. But Jerome knew that 18 hours wasn't necessary. With the right approach, the attack could probably be contained and reversed in less than 6 hours. He had seen similar malware during his NSA days, and he knew the specific techniques needed to fight back against adaptive threats. The key was understanding that these viruses were designed like living organisms. They evolved and adapted, but they also had weaknesses that could be exploited if you knew where to look. Jerome finished cleaning the conference room and moved on to Marcus Wellington's office. As he emptied the wastebasket, he couldn't help but notice the papers scattered across the desk, technical reports, damage assessments, and legal documents that painted a picture of a company in crisis. The numbers were staggering. Wellington Systems had already lost over $4 billion in market value. Several major clients were threatening to terminate their contracts. The company was facing potential lawsuits that could reach into the hundreds of millions. But more than the financial damage, Jerome could see the human cost. Marcus Wellington looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hair messy. Jerome had seen this look before, during his own dark period 12 years ago. It was the look of a man watching his entire world collapse and feeling powerless to stop it. As Jerome cleaned the windows in Marcus's office, he found himself thinking about his daughter, Keisha, who was now a senior at Howard University studying computer science. She had grown up watching her father struggle after his career was destroyed, but she had never lost faith in him. "Dad," she had told him just last month, "you're the smartest person I know. Someday the world is going to realize what they missed out on when they didn't give you a chance to help." Maybe today was that someday. Jerome finished his cleaning duties just as the sun was beginning to rise over the city. As he prepared to clock out and head home, he walked past the IT department one more time. The engineers were still there, looking even more exhausted than they had at midnight. Coffee cups and energy drink cans littered their desks. Several of them had their heads in their hands, clearly at the end of their rope. Jerome stood in the hallway for a long moment, weighing his options. He could go home, get some sleep, and return tomorrow night to clean up after what would probably be the worst disaster in Wellington Systems history. Or he could take a risk that might change everything, for the company, and for himself. He thought about his daughter, about the years he had spent feeling invisible and undervalued. He thought about the expertise he had accumulated over decades of study and work, knowledge that could save this company if anyone was willing to listen to the janitor. Jerome Washington had been invisible for 6 years. But sometimes, being invisible was exactly what someone needed to be in order to see the solution that everyone else had missed. As he walked toward the elevator, Jerome made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop being invisible and start being indispensable. Jerome Washington had never been the kind of man to take unnecessary risks. 6 years of working as a janitor had taught him the value of keeping his head down and staying out of other people's business. But, as he stood outside the elevator on Wednesday morning, watching the controlled chaos inside the IT department, something inside him snapped. Through the glass walls, he could see David Chen explaining to Marcus Wellington that they had made no progress during the night. The virus had not only resisted every attempt to remove it but had actually spread to backup systems that should have been completely isolated. At this rate, Wellington's systems would be completely destroyed within 24 hours. Jerome knew he couldn't just walk away. Not when he had the knowledge and skills to help. Not when hundreds of jobs and billions of dollars hung in the balance. And certainly not when the solution was so clear to him, even if it was invisible to everyone else. Instead of taking the elevator down to the parking garage, Jerome pressed the button for the 39th floor. The IT department was in even worse condition than it had been the night before. Jerome counted at least 15 engineers who had clearly been working all night, their clothes wrinkled and their eyes red with exhaustion. Empty pizza boxes and coffee cups covered every available surface. The large status monitor that normally displayed system health and neat green graphics now showed nothing but error messages and red warning lights. Jerome approached the security desk at the entrance to the department and cleared his throat. The young security guard, who probably hadn't slept either, looked up with tired eyes. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, clearly confused about why the janitor would be in the IT department during business hours. "I need to speak with David Chen," Jerome said quietly but firmly. "Tell him it's about the cybersecurity attack." The guard looked at Jerome like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "I'm sorry, sir, but Mr. Chen is dealing with a major crisis right now. I'm sure whatever maintenance issue you have can wait until. Tell him that the polymorphic malware they're fighting uses a genetic algorithm with recursive self-modification capabilities," Jerome interrupted. "Tell him that the reason their containment efforts are failing is because they're treating it like a traditional virus instead of an adaptive artificial intelligence." The guard's expression changed from confusion to shock. Those weren't words that came from maintenance reports or cleaning schedules. Jerome could see the young man trying to process how the janitor knew technical terms that most IT professionals had never heard. Within 5 minutes, David Chen was standing at the security desk, looking at Jerome with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. David was a brilliant engineer, but he was also exhausted and running out of options. He was willing to listen to anyone who might have a solution, even if that person happened to be wearing a janitor's uniform. "You're Jerome, right?" David asked. "You clean our floors. How do you know about genetic algorithms and self-modifying code?" Jerome took a deep breath. This was the moment where he would either help save the company or embarrass himself in front of everyone. "Because I designed similar systems for the NSA 12 years ago. I know how these adaptive viruses work because I helped create the techniques that defend against them." David stared at Jerome for a long moment, trying to reconcile what he was hearing with what he was seeing. The janitor who had been cleaning his office for 6 years was claiming to have cybersecurity expertise that surpassed most government specialists. "That's impossible," David said, though his voice lacked conviction. "If you had that kind of background, you wouldn't be working as a janitor. Sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan," Jerome replied simply. "I can explain my background later, but right now your company has maybe 18 hours before this virus destroys everything. I can stop it, but I need access to your core systems." David looked around the department at his exhausted team, at the screens full of error messages, at the backup systems that were failing one by one. Every conventional approach had failed. Every expert they had consulted had offered the same advice: shut everything down and rebuild from scratch, a process that would take weeks and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. "What exactly are you proposing?" David asked. Jerome pulled a small notebook from his pocket and quickly sketched a diagram. "The virus you're fighting isn't just malware, it's an artificial intelligence that learns from your defense attempts. Every time you try to block it, remove it, or contain it, it studies your methods and adapts. That's why traditional cybersecurity approaches aren't working." He pointed to different parts of his diagram as he explained. "But artificial intelligence systems like this have one fundamental weakness. They're optimized for learning and adaptation, not for efficient resource management. If you can force the virus to adapt faster than its system can handle, it will crash itself. David studied the diagram, his tired mind trying to follow Jerome's logic. You're talking about overloading the virus with adaptive challenges? Exactly. But not random challenges, specific ones that exploit the mathematical limitations of its learning algorithm. I've seen this exact approach work against state-sponsored malware that was considered impossible to defeat. Before David could respond, Marcus Wellington appeared at his shoulder. The billionaire looked even worse than he had the night before, his expensive suit now completely wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. The stress of watching his company collapse was written clearly across his face. "David, please tell me you have good news," Marcus said desperately. "The FBI team won't be here for another 12 hours, and our clients are starting to panic. I just got off the phone with the governor of Texas. They're considering declaring a state of emergency because our systems control part of their power grid." David hesitated for a moment, then gestured toward Jerome. "Marcus, this is Jerome Washington. He's been cleaning our offices for 6 years, but he says he has cybersecurity experience that might help us." Marcus looked at Jerome with barely concealed irritation. "David, I appreciate that you're trying to think outside the box, but we don't have time for—" He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes met Jerome's. Something in the janitor's calm, confident expression made Marcus pause. "Mr. Wellington," Jerome said quietly, "I understand this situation better than you might think. I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me. But your company is going to be destroyed unless someone can stop this attack in the next 18 hours. I can do that, but I need you to give me a chance." Marcus studied Jerome's face, looking for any sign of delusion or false confidence. Instead, he saw something he hadn't seen in any of his expensive consultants or government experts: absolute certainty. "What kind of cybersecurity experience?" Marcus asked. Jerome took another deep breath. "I spent 8 years with the NSA's Cybersecurity Directorate. I designed defensive systems that protected critical infrastructure from exactly this kind of attack. I've published research on adaptive malware countermeasures that's still classified. I know how to fight these viruses because I helped develop the technology they're based on." The IT department had gradually grown quiet as word spread that the janitor was claiming to have the expertise to solve their crisis. Engineers who had been working frantically at their computers now stood in small groups, listening to a conversation that seemed impossible. Marcus felt a wave of anger and frustration. "If you have that kind of background, what are you doing cleaning offices?" Jerome met his gaze steadily. "Because 12 years ago, I was falsely accused of security violations that destroyed my career. The charges were eventually dropped, but by then, my reputation was ruined. No technology company would hire me. I took this job to support my family while I tried to rebuild my life." The silence in the department was deafening. Marcus realized that for 6 years he had walked past a man with the exact expertise that could have prevented this disaster, and he had never even learned his name. "Even if what you're saying is true," Marcus said, "our systems are incredibly complex. You need weeks just to understand our architecture." Jerome pulled out his notebook again and quickly drew a detailed diagram of Wellington Systems' network architecture, including security protocols, backup systems, and data flow patterns. He had spent 6 years cleaning these offices, emptying trash cans full of technical documents, and overhearing conversations about system updates and security procedures. Without anyone realizing it, he had developed a complete understanding of how the company's technology worked. David looked at the diagram and felt his breath catch. Jerome had accurately mapped out systems that had taken David years to fully understand. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been listening and learning for 6 years," Jerome replied. "When you're invisible to people, you hear and see things they don't expect you to notice. I know your systems better than most of your engineers do." Marcus felt a mixture of shame and hope washing over him. Shame because he realized he had been so focused on credentials and appearances that he had completely overlooked the most qualified person in his building. Hope because for the first time in 36 hours, someone was offering a real solution instead of more problems. "What do you need?" Marcus asked. Jerome looked around the department at the exhausted engineers, the failing systems, and the red warning lights that represented his company's approaching doom. "I need a computer with administrative access to your core systems, and I need your people to stop trying to fight the virus while I work. Most importantly, I need you to trust me, even though you have no reason to." Marcus Wellington had built his fortune by making calculated risks, by seeing opportunities that other people missed. Looking at Jerome Washington, really looking at him for the first time, Marcus realized that sometimes the biggest risk was not taking a chance on the person standing right in front of you. "David, give him whatever he needs," Marcus said quietly. "Clear a workstation and grant him full system access." As Jerome sat down at a computer for the first time in 6 years as someone other than a janitor, he felt the weight of every person in the building watching him. They were counting on the invisible man to save them all. And Jerome Washington was finally ready to stop being invisible. Jerome Washington's fingers moved across the keyboard with the confident rhythm of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of cybersecurity. As lines of code scrolled across the screen, the exhausted engineers gathered behind him, watching in fascination as the janitor they had barely noticed for 6 years began to deconstruct their crisis with surgical precision. The first thing Jerome did was something none of the other experts had attempted. Instead of trying to remove or contain the virus, he began studying its behavior patterns. For 30 minutes he simply observed, taking notes in his small notebook while the virus continued its systematic destruction of Wellington's systems infrastructure. "What are you doing?" David Chen asked nervously. "Every minute we wait, it's doing more damage." Jerome didn't look up from the screen. "Right now your virus thinks it's winning. It's operating in full attack mode, which means it's showing me all of its capabilities. If I start fighting it immediately, it will adapt and hide its true nature. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I make my first move." Marcus Wellington stood behind the group, fighting every instinct that told him to demand immediate action. His company was bleeding money by the minute, but something about Jerome's calm confidence made him trust the process, even when he didn't understand it. After an hour of observation, Jerome finally began typing in earnest. But instead of attacking the virus directly, he started building something else entirely, a series of decoy systems that looked identical to Wellington's real infrastructure but existed only in isolated virtual environments. "You're creating honeypots," David realized, watching Jerome's code take shape. "More than that," Jerome replied. "I'm creating an entire fake version of your company's network, complete with fake data, fake security protocols, and fake vulnerabilities. The virus is going to think it found a much bigger target to attack." Jerome's strategy was unlike anything the other engineers had considered. Instead of trying to stop the virus from learning and adapting, he was going to encourage it to learn faster than it could handle. The decoy systems he was building contained thousands of different security challenges, each one designed to trigger the virus's adaptive algorithms. As Jerome connected his honeypot network to the main system, the virus immediately detected what it thought were new systems to attack. Within minutes, it began spreading into Jerome's decoy environment, eager to expand its destruction beyond Wellington's core infrastructure. "It's taking the bait," Jerome said, monitoring the virus's movement through his fake network. "Now comes the hard part." Jerome began activating different defensive measures within his decoy systems, not to stop the virus, but to force it to adapt constantly. Every time the virus figured out how to bypass one security measure, Jerome would activate 2 more. Every time it developed a new attack strategy, Jerome would present it with completely different challenges. The virus, driven by its artificial intelligence programming to overcome every obstacle, threw more and more of its computational resources into adapting to Jerome's decoys. Like a chess player trying to think 20 moves ahead against 20 different opponents simultaneously, the virus's learning algorithms began to strain under the load. "The response time is slowing down," David observed, watching the monitoring displays. "The virus isn't adapting as quickly as it was before." Jerome nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. It's like forcing a person to learn calculus, poetry, and martial arts all at the same time. Eventually, the brain gets overloaded and can't focus on any of them effectively. But Jerome's strategy was also dangerous. By encouraging the virus to spread into his decoy systems, he was giving it access to even more of Wellington's network. If his plan failed, the damage would be far worse than if they had done nothing at all. "Jerome, the virus is spreading faster than ever," Marcus said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Are you sure about this?" "Mr. Wellington, sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything," Jerome replied. "This virus was designed by people who assumed that defenders would try to block and contain it. They didn't plan for someone who would invite it to spread while secretly controlling where it goes." As the hours passed, Jerome continued to expand his decoy network, creating increasingly complex challenges for the virus to solve. He built fake databases full of meaningless information, fake security systems with deliberately obvious weaknesses, and fake communication networks that led nowhere. Each new system required the virus to learn different attack strategies, spreading its artificial intelligence thinner and thinner. By early afternoon, the strain on the virus was becoming apparent. Its adaptive responses were taking longer to develop, and some of its attacks were beginning to fail entirely. Jerome had successfully confused and overloaded the artificial intelligence that drove the virus, but he wasn't done yet. "Now for the real test," Jerome said, opening a new program he had been developing while the virus was distracted by his decoys. "I'm going to give it one final challenge that it can't possibly solve." Jerome created what appeared to be the ultimate target, a fake system that claimed to contain Wellington's most sensitive data, protected by what looked like minimal security. The virus, still programmed to seek out valuable information, immediately focused its remaining resources on this new target. But Jerome's final trap was mathematically impossible to solve. He had designed a security puzzle that required the virus to process infinite variables simultaneously, a task that would cause any computer program to crash as it consumed all available memory and processing power. "It's working," David said excitedly, watching the virus's performance metrics collapse across all systems. "The virus is burning through its own resources trying to solve your impossible puzzle." As the virus exhausted itself fighting Jerome's mathematical trap, its grip on Wellington's real systems began to weaken. Files that had been corrupted started to repair themselves. Systems that had been offline for 2 days slowly came back online. The red warning lights on the status monitors began changing to yellow, then to green. But Jerome wasn't finished. As the virus weakened, what happens when a man who controls billions of dollars suddenly finds himself completely helpless? When every screen goes black, every system crashes, and the empire he built from nothing threatens to crumble in a single day. This is the story of Marcus Wellington, a tech billionaire whose entire world collapsed in 72 hours, and how an unlikely hero emerged from the shadows to save everything he had worked for. It began on a Tuesday morning that seemed like any other, but would end with Marcus questioning everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and the people who truly keep the world running. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the person you overlook every single day is the one who holds the key to your survival. This is a story about pride, prejudice, and the moment when a billionaire realized that money couldn't buy the one thing he desperately needed, and how a man he had never truly seen became his only hope.